welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Angela Pearson.
I'm Paul Tanter.
I'm Matt Brooks.
Today we are delighted to be joined by a comedian, actor, author and stand-up who began in the 80s as part of the alternative comedy boom, performing at the Comedy Store. Her television credits include Saturday Live, The Young Ones, Girls on Top, French and Saunders, Happy Families, One Foot in the Grave, the sketch series Naked Video, and BBC One's Absolutely Fabulous, in which she played the dippy yet lovable Catriona. Some may know her as Rich Aunt Ruby in the movie Horrid Henry, or making waves on the first series of the celebrity diving show Splash in 2013, or perhaps from her 22 days in the Celebrity Big Brother house in 2017. In 2015, her comedy novel Losing It was nominated for the P.G. Wodehouse Comedy Literary Award, and she has since established the Comedy Women in Print Prize in order to shine a light on witty women writers. And in 2018, she performed a triumphant run at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with her one-woman show, I Might As Well Say It. But our listeners will perhaps recognise her from not one but two appearances in Bottom. First as the nurse who's having none of Richie's pleas for medical help in Apocalypse, and second as the Moldovan princess, Lady Natasha Letitia, Sarah Jane Wellesley, Obstromsky, Ponsonsky, Smythe, Oblomov, Boblomov, Dob. Helen Lederer, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here talking Bottom with us today.
Lovely to be here. Very long name. My gosh.
Yeah, just, we'll have half a dozen.
Say it. Dance for us. How many
my
people
goodness.
make you try and say the name?
I think I can go Lady. Was it Lady Jane? Did
No.
it start? Lady Wellesley.
Lady Natasha
Oh.
Letitia, and then Sarah Jane.
Because they're all good words, aren't they? So am I making up that Wellesley was in it?
Yeah, that's next, yeah.
Oh, right. So they all do sound quite. They were quite clever in getting the sort of upper class things, and then the madness. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Well, Helen, before we talk about Bottom, we'd like to ask a few things about your early days. Was acting or comedy what came first for you? What was your sort of passion, and why did you go into it? Was it drama?
Well, I went to a all-girls school. I suppose they still have them, don't they now? But no one had ever gone to a drama school in my day. They thought it was tantamount to prostitution, I think. The creativity was just like a problem, an issue. And I knew that I wanted to act, but obviously it wasn't normal. So I always had the instinct. And then I always say this, but if all of us think back to how we were with our peer group, there was always one funny person in our class, wasn't there? There just was always that one. In every group, you've got the funny one. So in our class, I was the funny. Well, there was two, but the other, we were both fat, but the other one wasn't funny. So I was fat and funny, and so I just think it was a natural place for me in a social context to, I don't know, just find the funny in the moment for all sorts of reasons. So I think I probably was off centre, but I just enjoyed having a laugh so much that it took me to a better place. So I was drawn to comedy and drawn to performing.
And did you have any particular comedy heroes when you were growing up then? What were your influences?
Well, when I was 10, because I'm very, very old, I think it was the top of the junior school, and on television at that time was David Frost. That was the week that was. And even at that age, or I don't know, 10-year-olds kind of sussed, aren't they? I just knew that was a really exciting programme. I just thought there was something about it, like a bit anarchic, the grown-ups doing something irreverent. I just got irreverence, I suppose. I loved that programme, and I did a sketch show at school with guests, and I was a David Frost character. And I think other people, I never got into the Goons because I just, that missed me generation wise, I think. But I really liked the sort of satire sketches that then led more into the Monty Python world, which of course I'm sure maybe there's an overlap with you chaps that in the playground you would talk about the Monty Python sketch. So I just like the joy of sketches, really.
So what was it that drew you to stand up in terms of actually getting up on stage and doing it? You knew you were funny at school and you were funny with your friends, but at what point do you sort of go, right, I'm going to get up in front of a room full of strangers and try this?
I know, it's a really good question. And I look back and I go, that is such a leap. I mean, less of a leap now in the sense that there's evidence of more people doing it, and particularly women doing it or female people doing it. I just must have wanted to do it. And it was the only way I knew to start a career. I think that's what you have to look back on. If you don't go to a drama school in the conventional way in those days, which I didn't do, then maybe that would have given me the equity card, the ticket, the normality, the auditions, the infrastructure, like grown-up people like, I don't know, Vanessa Redgrave or something, I don't know. That wasn't my path. So you're like most of us who decide they want to do something, yourself included, you go, okay, this is my goal. How do I do it? How do I get in?
So was it a career and it was the end goal, right? Because I read that you trained as a social worker, or you also worked as a social worker.
I did, because I did, to please my parents, I did a sociology degree. But also there are worse things. I always say there are worse things to do than try and be a social worker, because you're trying to help people. I mean, badly in my case, but that was before. I knew I wasn't where I wanted to be, but again, it's changed so much now. I mean, I was in my 20s and I did that degree, and then I did the job for, I think, 18 months or something. I went to bed worrying about it and woke up worrying. But it was then that I went to drama school, because my grandmother, bless her, died and left some money. And so although she was very strict, she also enabled me to, sort of start the dream a bit.
Yeah.
And people kind of like you a bit more if you say you've been to drama school. But it was a very weird postgraduate 1-year course. I mean, I didn't do the things that all the proper actors were doing in the coffee bar. I mean, we did have leotards and stuff, but, they were doing the proper 3-year full Monty.
Yeah.
But it was I just was so focused on what I wanted in those days.
So how soon after the Comedy Store opening did you arrive there and start doing slots? And you were am I right in thinking you were only one of 3 female acts at the time?
Well, I look at it that way. I mean, this is a dangerous statistic, because I remember when lovely Jenny Eclair wrote something in her book, and she made the point, I don't know how, of there being so few. And then all sorts of people hotly said, excuse me, I was doing it. And then there was a kind of like little group of people. But generally there were less. So I would say, like, in my year at school there were 3 of us. Like French and Saunders were 3 years ahead. They had toured Australia, I think, in the comic strip, so that when I had started out as a double act at Pentameters with my partner Maggie Fox, I remember seeing French and Saunders there. So, and we were going, oh, that's French and Saunders. And they were wearing white trousers and Guernsey jumpers and dressed the same, which was hilarious. So there was a kind of pecking order. But I would say, chronologically, I think I'm 3 years behind that star group.
Yeah.
Or that they weren't a star group then, but they were set to stardom because of their talent. But also they had their own office. Michael White was producing them. They were championed because they were in the right place at the right time with the right talent.
And what was it like performing at the Comedy Store? It must have been a bit. I kind of get the impression it must have been a bit of a bear pit at times.
Yes, it was a bear pit, and you look back and you just go, why would you want to do that? That was the canvas. If I just remember, again, all of us, you look back and you go, I was so ambitious. I just wanted it. I didn't really know what it looked like. I just wanted more and more of, like, definite gigs. Like, each time you get a booking, it's another rung on your own mental CV, So the Comedy Store I did as a double act. But I think I have done it on my own. But, like my friend John Hegley, wonderful poet, I shouldn't quote other people, but I mean, I don't think he had a great time even. So even kind of like cool people who can just put people down, like, had trouble. It wasn't just being female.
Did you need to have any sort of pre-prepared put-downs for heckles up your sleeve?
Yeah, well, I know that afterwards, like the 5 years later of the Joe Brand ilk, that became almost sort of banter, didn't it? It became acceptable. There's just sea changes of culture reflected in both performer and audience reaction. But in my time, people were perplexed that a woman was coming on stage. They genuinely were perplexed and distracted by the fact that, I was female, So I always wore trousers. And, we weren't particularly glamorous. We were strange looking, myself and Maggie Fox. We weren't there for what we looked like, but we were young and female. So I suppose that in itself is quite controversial at the time, because there's an assumption that there's another agenda somewhere lurking. I've given it a bit of thought since, but at the time, I just cracked on and did it.
Were there any memorable heckles that you got? Or...
Yeah, well, the one that I always say, which is quite rude, I was just so shocked, which is the thing that I'm writing about in my memoir, is that this guy in the audience said, "Helen, let's see your clit," right? And I didn't know what that was at the time. And I know that sounds so naive, but honestly, now that's obviously common parlance, isn't it? But I then had to say, "I'm so sorry, you want to see my..." Like, I need it repeated because I didn't know what he was talking about. And it was all kind of very awkward.
Did he then repeat it?
Yes, I think he must have done, because I just know that I didn't know what he meant. So I had to, because I'm a polite person, I like to address people. I like to address a heckle, as best I can. But, that's funny in its truth. It's funny. But also I do remember afterwards thinking, wow, that's weird. It was affecting. And then even years later, not that long ago, about 8 years ago, I had to do a after dinner thing on a boat in Portsmouth with chartered accountants. And that was a terrible gig, and nobody could see me because of a pillar in the way. But I went round to talk to the people, and they were weird, these accountants. They did all sorts of strange wanking shape with the hands when I came up. I mean, and you just go, okay, that's okay then. This is what people do. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? People's behaviour that is considered okay. And that wasn't very long ago.
This is it. I mean, there's a discussion now, isn't there, that it's not okay to shout.
Well, there's a new discussion. Exactly right. There is. But I wasn't part of it. And so it is quite interesting when if that's just your norm, that doesn't mean to say that you're not a caring or a radical or all the right things, which of course we all are. You can't change the situation you're in necessarily until it becomes fashionable and acceptable to challenge it, which it did, I think, a few years later.
I suppose at the beginning, things are a bit more adversarial and confrontational.
Yes.
People always thought that, I guess when we were younger, that don't want to be in front row of a comedian because it's they'll slag me off. The people will haggle back
so
and
sort
forth.
of two-way, you think?
Yeah, but
almost.
people aren't really. It's not really in fashion anymore, is it? To be that nasty and the heckles.
No.
It doesn't happen.
But when you think about Alexei Sale and indeed, Rick and Aid, and I'm trying to think of Nigel and
Peter
Richardson. Less so, because Nigel did his more kind of odd internalized character, but that wasn't aggressive by that. But the delivery was loud and aggressive.
Keith Allen was
very much
like that,
so,
wasn't he?
and that I think was very interesting style of comedy. But I obviously, to be authentic, to even have the balls to go and do it, in mental balls, obviously.
We understood,
Yes, I can say that. Can I say that? I don't know.
Yeah, you can.
Aggression wasn't my delivery style. It may have been in my head, but it wasn't my delivery style to get laughs.
Where was it that you first met Rick and Aid? Was it at the Comedy Store, performing with them, or elsewhere?
I met Rick, although I can't remember the actual first, but in 83 I was in Edinburgh. I did my first Edinburgh in 82 in a sketch show. Then 83 I was in Edinburgh doing stand-up with Arnold Brown and Norman Lovett. And I met or got on particularly well with Rick then in Edinburgh, because that was the year where Rick, Andy de la Tour and Ben Elton were doing their sellout show in the Assembly Rooms. So we got on, we connected, we talked about comedy a lot. Yeah, we fraternised deeply in that festival. And he was at his height, queues round the block. And he, I think, did his Kevin Turvey thing. I got to see it. and the audience went crazy. So that was like a total moment in comedy, wasn't it, of what people wanted and what they were given by him.
Had you seen his Kevin Turvey before that? Was this after he'd done it on TV?
I think so, and I'd heard of it, and I can't remember where the Young Ones was at that time. Did the Young I can't remember if I know I then did the Young Ones.
I think if it was 83, it was probably between the two series because they were 82 and 84.
Yes, exactly. So I must have done the second series of the Young Ones then.
Do you remember what you thought when you saw his Kevin Turvey?
Yeah, and there were other programs, weren't there, where in those days there were a few stand-up programs where individuals were kind of showcased. They got their little slot of 5 minutes, or they were sandwiched in another context sometimes. Like I did something called the Janet Street Cat Show, where I did my little stand-up. So stand-ups were employed in the context of other things in those days. But Kevin Turvey, I remember the Mac, the Berry. I remember it being very cool, very layered, in the same way that David Frost and the sketch show was very layered. You knew that what you were getting was actually not what you were getting. You were getting something else. And I think that's why it excited everybody.
So did you make friends with any of the other comic strip gang?
So on that Edinburgh, obviously, Ben Elton very much so, although it wasn't comic strip, but they all cross-pollinated they gave me amazing jobs, but not in the comic strip. I was never in a comic strip because that was Peter Richardson, and he never employed me ever. And that was like, the first taste of, wanting something so much and then not getting it. It's like, oh God, they're the cool group and I'm not in the cool group.
Did you know Peter Richardson and ever say, or do you ever meet him and say, get me in?
Yes, I did. This is the other thing in those days. I was desperate to work. I wanted to work. And how it's considered. it isn't being needy is very unsexy and very unattractive. I mean that in a kind of metaphorical way. But I did. I was the one out of Maggie and me who, in the double act of, scouring the stage, scouring time out. I did a lot of homework. I must have wanted it so badly. And then thinking, well, if we write, should we write in? I just remember writing to people in those days for my memoir, I've got a poster of Maggie and my CV, and it's so desperate, like available for gigs. I think it says available quite several times on one sheet of paper. So, you had to push. If people have got their club and their group, why should they expand? But the thing is, I don't think I was a threat because I was a one-off. I kind of came as a one-off. And many occasions I was given parts in various things through the 90s, I think. They were great to me. But the comic strip was a group. And because they were so successful, they could be as quirky or as outlandish or as conventional. They could just do what they want because, like with Ab Fab, people just queue up to be part of it. Yeah. And this is what happens when you have an elite, a championed form of comedy. It's exciting. They have a lot of power.
And were you performing in the double act as well as doing solo stand-up, or did you part ways with Maggie eventually?
Yes, well, what happened with Maggie is that I met her in an audition for a TIE, Theatre and Education job. Neither of us got. And she tells me that on the station, on the way back, I approached her to work with me. Because again, in those days, there's part of me that does... I am an ideas person, I have to say. And it has been squashed out of me over the years because a career's kind of... 40 years is a long time to keep being that bright, eager person. But I am an ideas person. I thought, she's amazing. I just knew that we would have a laugh. I just knew she would be perfect. She was working with another double act called Lip Service. So she said she'd have to check. I didn't mind. I just thought, I poached her. So we were together for 9 months. And that was a brilliant, brilliant time. But fair enough, she obviously wanted to go, and Lip Service are going strong today. They're amazing. But we had 9 months of it. Then she couldn't do a gig, and we were booked at Pentameters, run by Arnold Brown, comedian, Scottish comedian, and I just went and did it on my own. And that was when I knew, I did a good one, that one, and then you have to do a few bad ones after that. But then I thought, again, I didn't question it. I thought, I'll do it on my own then, that's it. And then it began.
Yeah. Did you see Rick and Aid do the Dangerous Brothers act, of course, at the Comedy Store Live?
I saw them do the Dangerous Brothers, I think at Dingwalls in Camden Lock, some kind of dark, smoky event. I certainly saw them at the old Comedy Store. I saw Alexei Sale. I was terrified, still am, of Alexei Sale. Oh, he triggered something in me. Really scary.
What was it about him that you found scary?
Just so shouty, and a wall was up. Like you weren't to know him, you were to know what he was saying, which is very funny and clever and all that. But when off stage, really quiet, and I just assumed none of them liked me anyway. I don't think they did like me particularly, because a middle class woman on her own is a bit weird in those days. So everything was a bit interpreted, I think. So you either go out with someone or have a thing with them, because there was a lot of sexuality about, which is all part of the scene, which is really normal, I think. So you either have sex with people, or they don't like you, or you get ignored.
Yeah.
One of the three.
God, it's a tough. That is a tough. To break into that industry, Helen. It's an incredible thing that because I know you obviously were kind of on the outskirts, as it were, of the comic strip gang, but to then be welcomed into the fold a bit later in the 90s, like you say, like it always felt to me like you've been in the Young Ones, you've been in Bottom, you've been it felt to me like you were very much part of eventually you were part of that gang, post comic strip days.
Yes. Well, it was lovely in that early 90s, like, to be given a role, with a name, and I was always surprised whenever I got it, because I knew I was doing my own thing. And the wonderful thing about Rick is that he knew that, and that's why when we met in Edinburgh, he really was, I felt anyway, genuinely interested in what I was doing, because that's all I wanted to do. My sort of 10-20 minutes on stage, that was everything to me. So we kind of shared that. So I think I got respect at the beginning, because I didn't really want anything other than to work. And I think that's a great place to be. But it isn't for everyone, it can annoy people.
Yeah, I've heard that Rick was very supportive. He was obviously, very much a champion of the female acts, and said that they should all be paid the same and things like that.
Yes, a very kind person, and modern. Or is that modern? I mean, to our thinking now, it's just common sense, isn't it? But
ahead of his time.
Ahead of his time, I think you're right. What would my memory anyway? I mean, I didn't have to be in a double act with him, so Adrian would tell you if he was here in a room. He was aware of the other people in the room, and that's so important. You can make an experience so positive by being aware of other people, and he was about positivity so much.
So how did you come to appear in the Young Ones? You were in 2 episodes. You appeared in one as a bank teller, and the other one as Gwendolyn. In one of those was the summer holiday episode. How did those appearances come about? Do you recall?
I think they just asked me. I think that because they were being so looked after by the BBC, they'd have a system, and then did I have an agent? I probably had an agent, and then somebody somewhere would have phoned me up to do it. I didn't have to audition or anything. They just decided, we know you from the circuit, you could play that. And also, maybe from their point of view, they wanted to people it with people from the circuit who were kind of, in quotes, of their genre cool, but not as starry as they were. They were probably breaking away from the ordinary rep actor. Why would they want those people with them? They were about anarchy and change and vibe. And they got people like the Oblivion Brothers. God, I mean, the number of names that I used to gig with that were all somehow on the set doing something, like walking on and off as a policeman or a fireman or something. If you look at the cast list, you go, hundreds of people, names I recognise just turned up. And I think maybe they wanted to be surrounded by that group.
Yeah, I suppose it was probably a continuation of Paul Jackson bringing a lot of those acts onto TV in the first place in Boom Boom Out Go the Lights, and then I suppose it's natural if you're kind of coming up in a scene with people, then if you're the first people to get a TV show, it's nice and it's natural to sort of try and get your friends on it as well.
Yes, yeah. I think so. I think certainly at the beginning, I don't know, I may be projecting this, but, they got there, through hard work, through putting themselves out there, through creating their own material, all the important stuff. They did get it. And I think there is that feeling like, ooh, we've got it. We want to give to the guys that, 6 months ago, we were all in the same green room or whatever, pub rather, waiting to go on stage. So there is that thing where you want a bit of largesse to go to your peer group.
Do you recall much of the recordings of the live shows of the young ones?
I do remember, it must have been at BBC TV Centre, because I just remember like probably everything I did was at TV Centre. That's why when all the lovies said, oh, I cried when the White City was changed into that whatever Soho House or whatever it is now, flats. There'd be that chaos of having the tech run, of turning up, getting in your costume, not speaking out of turn to people. I was very much, I'll just do what I'm told. You know that it's a proper grown-up thing where you have a part and you have to say your lines. And I think when I did Gwendolyn with Alexei Sayer, I was a medieval chat show hostess, and he was the guy, the jester who spun the wheel or something, sort of Bob Monkhouse type.
Yeah.
And I was, I don't think we spoke. I don't think we said much. I could be making that up and doing a complete disservice. But maybe I'm just remembering me being very, oh my gosh, I'm on the young ones, right? I just better concentrate and just do what I'm told, No more, no less. God, it was all around that time, because I had a really small job in a community centre called Interaction, where the TIE group was called Dogs Troop, and a guy called Chris Ellis, who was at Manchester with Rick, Aid and Ben, was in Dogs Troop. So I kind of heard about the young ones, and I knew that it was that first show, the mix of with Lisa Mayer putting in her kind of more surreal. So they did, I suppose, adopt a more Terry Gilliam sort of element that was juxtaposed in the Monty Python. So they did throw a lot of different things at it, and some people preferred this more than others. But it was an example of something new, and let's put it all in. Let's go with it. So it was really, the first series was like that.
You were in the famous Saturday Live Dangerous Brothers Kinky Sex sketch as one of the prostitutes. That sketch was banned at the time. Do you remember any of the kind of furore around that? I know Channel 4, I think the censors said that it couldn't be broadcast. So
Wow.
Well, I think it got broadcast, but it certainly didn't come out on video for a long time. It's now on the DVD.
Is it?
Yeah.
I would love to see that, because I think there's a photograph where I know that I probably had to not wear a lot, but, a basque or something. And I've never been a slim person at the best of times, that wouldn't be something that I personally would feel comfortable doing, but obviously you just do it. There were three of us I remember a photograph on set of the three of us dressed as.
It was Carla Mendoza. And Christine Ellerbeck, I think.
Oh, yes, the name rings a bell. Yeah. But I wonder what we did. I can't remember what we did.
Well, I wondered whether you'd had the call from Rick that he wanted your services for the afternoon, and that's why you'd said yeah.
Well, I would have said yes.
Well, yeah, Rick's in a sort of nurse's outfit strung up to a ceiling, waiting to be,
Oh, my goodness.
submissive, I think. And then, but you guys turn up, and obviously Eddie comes back and
and what do we
finds
do?
Rick's plan. You're all just kind of on the sofa. I don't think you don't do anything too kinky. It's really quite tame by today's standards.
I wonder why it
I
was
think
banned.
Probably just because it was a bit rude. I don't know.
Yeah. And when that was in the 80s, so he was obviously. Yeah, so he was doing something quite extreme, because the thing about them is the more extreme, the more kind of physicality, the more, like fire dropping through floor or whatever. They loved it. They did a lot of that.
But you don't remember that being banned then? You don't remember any of the...
I'll have to find out about that now. That's quite good. But I just wonder what we did. If we said anything, we just sat about on a sofa being tame.
There's a reference to bondage and things like that, but there's nothing over... I mean, obviously Rick is strung up to the ceiling in a nurse's outfit. It's a little bit risque,
And you see now they wouldn't do that. You see all those kind of, let's call them flights of fancy, shall we, would currently have connotations that people would consider not helpful, wouldn't they now? So it's an interesting time where you go into your imagination, go into your head, just do that. Or let's all dress up as trolls, or let's be naked as hot water bottles, but whatever, that would happen. You would just do it.
Do you think there was more freedom to just kind of let your imagination run wild? back
Yeah,
then.
because comedy, comedy doesn't work, but unless you kind of go there, like really go there, I don't see how you can make people laugh.
The shock element.
The shock element, the surprise element. Now, that's not to say I think we're in an important time, but I had to do a job last week and looked at some of my old material, and I was thinking, I can't use the jokes. It was staggering. I was thinking, oh my goodness. Luckily, there was a power cut, and I managed to sing Kumbaya, which got a lot of laughs, but I couldn't legislate for that. I was thinking, thank God I can do something. No, we're at a very interesting time right now. But anyway,
it's more about recognition now, I suppose, and as I think you've said before in interviews, being more respectful. But it certainly it feels like there's a few parameters that you really have to consider now.
You have to consider them,
writing,
and it's nice looking back to. Is it an innocence? I don't know, but that in those days. What people I think loved about Adrian and Rick particularly was just the energy, the things that would break, the smashing things, being out there, rude, anarchy, physical anarchy. That's what people wanted. Sort of grimy, dirty, physical anarchy is what we got from them.
Do you have any stories of any crazy anarchy on set or behind the scenes? Anything being smashed up, broken, or any of the wild parties that you're legally not allowed to talk about?
Well, I know that when I did the bottom episode, but this was just an accident. I think Adrian had mashed potato. I think that was the considered cordon bleu meal for someone like myself, who is a rich Moldovan someone.
Yes, it's caviar and mash.
Okay, caviar and mash, excellent. And it was inevitably it didn't come off the spoon, and then we had to do a few takes, and I think that made its way into the outtake thing.
Oh, that made it into the final cut. The mash not coming off the spoon.
And he just puts it down.
I thought that was scripted. Was that a fluff?
That was a fluff because
wow.
It didn't happen. And it went on for a while. You're going, ooh, now what do we do now?
Yeah.
But I knew that, again, because of my very good behaviour, thinking, I'll just stay put. I'm not going to do anything. These are the men. They're doing the thing. I mustn't move. Do not react. Somebody will tell me in a minute what to do. But I think that did make it into an outtake thing. Yeah, as well.
That's fantastic.
So while we're on the subject, we've got on the subject bottom now. Let's delve into your character. One thing it's always confused me from a young age. How did the nurse become Lady Natasha? Are they related in some way? Were you undercover as a nurse, or is it two completely different people?
I think we're two different people, to be honest. Different episode. Yeah, I can't remember what happened in the nurse. Actually, wasn't Barbara Windsor in the episode when I was a nurse?
Oh no,
that's
Liz Smith.
Liz Smith
as the fortune teller.
Yeah, I think you're remembering Filthy, Richie
I'm
Cat
remembering
because you are a nurse in that as well.
Oh yes.
Do you know I've been a nurse so many times in Naked Video, which was 84, was it? That was a sketch series BBC Scotland did. I was always a nurse, always a nurse in those days. The jokes were Freemasons and being a nurse. So I just got used to being a nurse. But you can try and be a funny nurse, but that was normal. But I suppose storytelling in Sketchland has to be, I understand there has to be cameos or / stereotypes to be funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in you're great as a nurse in both Filthy and in Bottom. But in Bottom you're having a lot of back and forth with Richie, who's trying to wangle his way in for an appointment, even though he's not on the list. So there's a lot of banter between him, pretending he's a certain name, and
that's
like you died this morning. Change sex,
Is that what
he's just reading the names off your sheet, and you're
okay.
you're playing the secretary brilliantly.
Okay, that's it. It's coming back now. Yes. So again, I am the feed. I am the straight person, which is how it should be. They're the stars. They're the the crazy. They're the ones who are breaking the rules.
You get great sarcastic lines though.
Yeah.
Like
Do
your
I?
lines
I'm
are
gonna
the
watch it.
sarcastic bit. You're putting him down at every step. You know.
How
You're the
nice.
straight person, but you do get a good few sort of digs in at the end, and then at the end he sort of he gives you a little tap on the cheek
he
that
puts blood on
puts
you.
blood all over your face, and then walks off because he's just done something to get blood on him.
Oh wow! And what do I do when with
You
the
play
blood
it
on my
really
face?
straight. You just
like you've not noticed there's blood on it, and
Yeah.
just quite fade. So I don't know if maybe you didn't know that there was going to be blood on your
No,
face.
well, it wasn't going to affect me if I did. How funny!
So-
No, that's nice that they wrote those lines. So that's all credit to the modernism that they would allow other people to get the laughs that you're remembering. You're picking up on that. They wrote them. They wrote it all. Yeah.
Well, and so they must obviously you knew them anyway, but they must have been impressed sufficiently because you did that episode in the first series, and then the second series rolls around, and you're one of few people to return in another episode of Bottom, but one of we think possibly the only person to return as another character.
Oh.
As Lady Natasha.
Oh, well, that's cheered me
do you,
up.
Do you recall how that came about? Was there just another? You got a call from them and
Yeah.
said we want you to come back and do something else, or
Yes, in those days, as I remember it, you would get. I got a call for that. I mean, thinking about when I was in Happy Families, that was written by Ben Elton, because I knew Ben. I would see him occasionally on the circuit and everything. Oh, he was way above me, sort of comparing the Comedy Store. But I remember we all went round to Ben's flat to do a read through of Happy Families. So I felt very. I mean, I was so excited to be in it, but it was more collegiate in that sense. But going back to the Bottom thing, I just remember, this is your job, turn up, do this.
do you know if was Lady Natasha written specifically for you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm very, do you know, in those days, you don't think, you just do.
Yeah.
You just jump in and you do. I remember going for a costume fitting going, oh my God, this dress, there is no bodice. I mean, like, it wasn't even a bodice. There was, and then I remember in the first scene where they go to the dating agency played by wonderful Lisa Maxwell, they then say that the person they need has got to have big jugs in the script, or whether that would be allowed. No, obviously not. And so that's where I don't think I have particularly big jugs even then. That's not what I'm known for, I don't think. But what was interesting was the dress. The costume person then had to make the dress very revealing for the jug element. So there was a continuity. So maybe a little fantasy here. Rick decided to place me in a situation. Is it allowed to say this? Where there was a jug situation? I have no idea. But from my point of view, it was very much you're told it's cast, it's a name, you turn up, that's what you do.
Do you think they were leaning on your Czech heritage when they made her an Eastern European princess?
Oh, do you know, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the accent, the bit of a hybrid Middle European accent, because of course, yes, my grandmother, she was tall, or like this, like a male, but very like this. So I suppose I grew up with accents in the home. So that the European accent was kind of normal. That was nice to jump into that accent. I don't know whether it was Russia, Bulgaria, who knows what it was.
It was brilliant accent. I mean, did you base it on anyone then, or it just kind of came naturally to you then because you've grown up?
I've grown up. My grandmother had a very, very strong accent because she was half German, half Czech. So she didn't really know who she was. And so then coming to England, she had a very strong accent that was just a mix. And my father got rid of his accent because he came to school when he was a boy here. But you could hear it a little bit, a tiny bit. Like people say, why does your dad talk funny? It was just a slightly clipped accent. But the grandmother, she was full Monty. It was embarrassing when you were growing up with that kind of accent.
And did Rick and Aid give you any notes on the character then at all, or did you interpret the script with that, or did they give you any direction on that?
Yes. So I remember because I knew Rick nicely. I knew him well, and from Edinburgh time, he did say to me, I think in the tech run, don't crash the laughs. And I thought, okay. oh my God, no, I must not crash it. Oh my God. So that's probably another reason why you see me being very still and just like not very emotionless, like just saying my lines, because I was thinking I mustn't crash the laughs. And there was a kind of exchange where he says, do you want to do it? Do you want to do it? And I go, yes, yes, yes. And so I just have to kind of make sure I mustn't crash the laughs because Rick told me not to.
Was that difficult during the live recording? Because a lot of people who have done the show have said that the audience for Bottom, especially, even when they've done a lot of other sitcoms, the audience for Bottom was very, very raucous and you got big laughs. Was that difficult then when you've got the audience and everyone wants to hit it first time?
Oh, yeah.
Not to step on the laugh at the
Absolutely. And that's probably why he told me to do that, thinking about it, you saying that, because that's how they would work. They'd be crazy before the take, you know, they'd sort of bold into the studio, crazy, big, loud stuff. Audience love it, you know, reciprocal stuff. They can whip them up. So you do want to kind of get it first time if you can. And I can't remember. I'm sure we did. But then I remember then we had to change rooms in the studio, because then I can't remember this much, but I had to then go into the bedroom, didn't I, to seduce him.
Yeah.
To seduce Richie. What an easy job.
And oh God. And that was just, it's coming back to me now. And I do remember rehearsing it, and you know, you just go, okay, just got to jump in here, haven't you? Just do it. Just not get too self-conscious.
Bai told us about a deleted scene where Richie prematurely ejaculated.
Oh,
do you remember this?
Oh, what was that with me?
Yes.
No. I think this would be before you enter the bedroom. So Richie's there on his own with a Joy of Sex book, and he's
okay.
And then you knock on the door, and so in the show he says, "Oh no, I think you say something like, 'Are you ready to go?' And he says, 'Medically, the chances are against.' He looks down and says, 'Medically, the chances are against it,' which means he's just jizzed.
It's sort of still there, but apparently it was a bit
there
more.
because he says, 'I've got to change my pajama bottoms,' doesn't he?
Yeah, but the thing Ed Bai said, the thing that was cut was Rick's. I think basically Rick's cum face. They had to. They couldn't have him ejaculating on national television, so they had to cut that.
Oh, what a shame! That would have been glorious.
Do you recall much of rehearsals?
I do remember rehearsal, that thing where as I say, you just have to go for it to look professional. I mean, nobody wants to look like embarrassed or silly, do you? I mean, it was very important to me when you're cast in those things. You know, I always assume everyone is superior to me. That's like I'm still like that with everyone, you know. Most comedians are like that. We have real kind of issues with our personalities, you know. I mean, so I have kind of inferior superiority conflict, you know, a mix of both of those. And so I had to make sure that he just led me, you know. You just do the best job you can. And because Rick is so dynamic and just so full of ideas, and he just made it easy. You just go, all I have to do is just do this, and it will be brilliant. Because he is a leader. He's a leader.
It's funny because you seem in control in a lot of those scenes. You know,
he would put me there.
Yeah, you know, that's the you know.
He would put me there. He would know what he wanted, and then, you know, years later, the last job I did with him was a radio play, I think in 2000, and that was really interesting. I know we're jumping about, but you know, I remember it was so lovely to be with him, even though he'd had the accident by then. Shouted a lot because he couldn't hear so much, but it was fine. We all just all shouted a lot. It was great. And I just I mean, he is a unique person. Unbelievable.
When you got the script and saw that you were in such a huge chunk of it, and you had a sex scene with Rick Mail, I mean, was that how did that feel when you got hold of that script?
But it's interesting because when you look back, I think because I just took myself very seriously in those days, and because I was always on my own, apart from when I was in the double act, I just I turn up and just try and do the job, and I don't think I was chuffed. I mean, I'd already connected with Rick before off scene from Edinburgh, so I kind of knew him in that way, and so it was a case of just being very professional. But what I loved about Rick is that he was a very modern man. He was a gentleman, and he would just kind of give a nod and a wink to any past, so he wouldn't hide anything. You know, some men would. He was just so open, and But I didn't think, oh, lucky me, I've got a sex scene, because I probably already had that.
It's the most unsexy sex scene, really, isn't it, in the end? But your off-camera strip is pretty legendary.
God, I can't remember
do you remember that? I mean, I don't know. You were off camera, so, but I like Rick's reactions to you throwing various items at him.
I had. Did I go behind a screen or something?
I think
that
you're off camera. We're just watching Rick getting various bits of lingerie and things thrown over him.
Is it just some not extra? Is it some runner just throwing things at him?
Who knows? I wish I could remember. It's sort of coming back. But again, Rick would have told the story. I mean, the impact it's made on you, all through his expression. Oh, amazing.
But also it's very clever because, I mean, minimal nudity. There's, you don't see anything at all with it being BBC, even after the watershed. It's quite respectful, really, the way they do handle it. I mean,
what happened in that scene? So I took my clothes off.
But you're completely off camera doing that, and then it's just you in bed, so you just see your shoulders really lifting up from behind the duvet, or the sheet,
and
the dirty sheets.
Do we consummate it?
Well, no. Rick keels over before the deed is done.
He's about to jump on and then clutches his chest and collapses to the floor and tries to sort of blow you a kiss as he falls.
Just amazing. That you see, that is the tragedy, the tragicomedy, the ultimate tragicomedy, isn't it? Just like so symbolic. Yeah.
So can you describe what happened, not in reality, obviously, but within the characters in that moment when Richie has fallen over, is having a heart attack? You were in bed.
Yeah.
The next thing we see, they're in hospital when you've shagged Eddie at some point. So at some point, you have... What would you think happened?
So, well, obviously, was the character in need of something? They thought I was rich, and obviously I wasn't. Is that right?
It's
so
sort
I
of
was
like
after
that.
it.
Yeah, that's number. You say something. Oh, I would be after you, be interested, but not because my family are.
That's it.
It's not because of that. Yeah, okay.
Clearly, I am amoral. If there and
how have you been fooled by this man? Is so clearly on the take. It's it's so funny, isn't it? It's so obvious that this guy's full of shit.
I think both your characters are pretending to be of rich stock.
Yes, that's it. It's a double bluff. We're both pretending, and again in the writing, they make themselves cuckold, don't they? They do that a lot. I mean, they do all this for them to be the fool. I mean, I read somewhere very pretentiously, because I can't really remember it, but they're fans of Samuel Beckett, and like two guys, talking about absurdity. So it's kind of absurd, but also they are the losers always. So the joke is always back on them. So Lady Natasha was the one who just so I assume, and it was such a betrayal then that of the other, Eddie would just go, oh well, I'll have a bit then. And clearly I obviously offered it. My word.
Well, you were onto him and up his trouser leg like a whippet.
Oh, that's it.
I think
I remember that.
Is the promise. God.
God.
Do you get people shouting quotes at you in the street and you're bemused, or do you recognise them?
Now talking about it now, it really is quite vivid, which is interesting. Because I'm one of those people, I don't know who I am or what I represent to anyone. I just sort of crack on. But it is interesting that if people do sort of talk to me, it's a lot of them were probably at university at the time, and just they said, oh, I get a lot of people saying, I mean, this sounds so boastful, and I'm not, but they had a crush on me from Bottom. And then I go, I'm so sorry. Then now you have to see me now. I haven't got my frock on. But I think it must have conjured, because as you described, a whole scenario, there's a lot of shoulder, a lot of décolleté, and a lot of sex. And I happened to be cast in that moment. So maybe that's what triggered people's interest and their fantasies.
Do you ever get people quoting lines back to you either in the street or tweeting them at you or anything like that?
Well, yes, I do on the Twitter, because I'm so rubbish on the Twitter that people go, "Oh, that's a very nice blouse you're wearing." I get that, which I just is just you laughed. It's like it's just their use of words is just so on it. It's just on it, and that is the joy, isn't it? Like with proper comedians that I consider that you go, "Oh God, you've nailed it. Thank you so much for using that word in that way. Thank you, thank you, thank you." You know, it's adorable, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you ever have people quoting stuff at you and in the moment you think, I have no idea what this is from? I know they're quoting something because of the way they're saying it, but I can't remember for the life of me recall what this is from.
I can't remember a lot of it, but I think if I Googled it more, but again, I'm one of these people who don't watch myself back when I've done something because I can't make it any better. So, and it's a bit naked looking at one's face and stuff. So I obviously have seen some stuff, it'd be a lie, but I know it's more professional to look at what you've done so you can, in quotes, learn from it. But I go, oh, it's just done, move on.
So when you're shooting something, you're not an actor who likes to to watch the take.
Oh my God, no. I've no interest, and I barely even know where the camera is.
Okay.
You know, there are some actors who know a lot about that and ask for. So, and I know I think I like to be in denial about it because I just like to be in the moment, and maybe that comes from being in stand-up. You just go, I just have to be in the moment. I don't care. I don't want to get distracted by these other things.
Does that help when you're in when you're in a sitcom and there's 5 cameras, so you don't know which one's on you, rather than if you're shooting a single camera thing where you know the camera's there? Does it help then?
I guess in something like that, I will be told how to play it, or I will be made aware of the angle, so I don't sort of turn my back to the camera. But that would be really nice to do stand up without having to look at the audience. That would be my ideal. I think I've noticed other actors incredibly conscious of it, and I find that a distraction. And I always get disappointed when you're with that kind of actor. You go, oh God, it's all about the look. Whereas I think I just have to be in it in my head. And that's why I don't like to look at afterwards, because I can remember being there in my head and I think, oh, I could have done it better.
Yeah.
I'm very horrible to live with. Can you imagine how neurotic that would be?
Do you like to rehearse a lot before doing something, or are you like, no, let me just wait until I'm opposite the actor doing the take, and then it's a bit more real?
I think in those, I think I've learned to get better at rehearsing, again because of the stand-up, because it's so immediate. But rehearsing is good. But with comedy, and that's why with Rick and Aid, their relationship, they've got both of their own individual talent and then the combined talent, how exciting for them to see what would happen. Yeah. I mean, I just did a recent ordinary TV job in Doctors. I mean, that hasn't been that much.
Were you a nurse?
Was I a nurse? Good question. Actually, what was I? No, I was a bird watcher randomly. But anyway, and the rehearsing can get with something like that, you're on, a guest actor is on and then off, and you've got to hit your mark and you've got to say your lines. So to expect to rehearse is kind of a bit unrealistic as well.
When you were shooting the episode, all the episodes on Bottom, we've heard that Rick would get very, very nervous before recording.
Yes, you saying that, it makes sense. I don't vividly remember that, but I know the kind of character he would be nervous. Because he had to carry so much. I mean, like him going on stage as Kevin Turvey and just going, the audience would go crazy, and then he would do nothing. And that isn't straightforward. So you have to psych yourself up into that sense of being to play that audience. So it just doesn't just happen. You got to be it. And I think nerves, I've suffered from nerves. I call it suffering because you just think, like, a long time I used to get so nervous before I go on. What is interesting now as an older person is actually that has gone away, sort of about 60% gone away, which is fantastically freeing. Because nerves, you need nerves, but they can also inhibit you. So it's quite nice to go, oh, sod it, I'll just be, if people get it, your timing is so much better if you don't have that inhibitory, oh, how is this going to come across? Then you kind of lose all your timing.
Do you think you suffer less from nerves because as you get older you don't you care less about whether people don't like it or that kind of thing. It's
Yes.
It doesn't bother me now, because if they don't like it, it doesn't matter.
Well, I still mind if people don't like me, but
Right.
sometimes if I'm in a bad mood, I can make people not like me, so I can do that. I did that quite recently, so maybe that's something about being old. But yeah, I mean, a whole thing about being a comedian is like me, because if people like you, they're more likely to laugh. If you're scared of someone, you might appreciate them, but you're not going to laugh. And a comedian is fed by the laughs. Their effectiveness is, oh, was that a good night? Did people laugh? Or was that a very quiet night? That equals bad.
I would assume it would be from the Lady Natasha episode, if there was one. But do you recall a favourite line or a favourite scene that you from your time and experience doing Bottom?
Well, I do like the bit when we were in the kitchen, the grungy kitchen, and he was, I think he was on the sofa and I was on the table on an upright chair, and he was going question after, and when he said, "Will you marry me?" and then I went, "Yes," and he said, "Huh?" He said, "What did you do?" "Yes," and then that was lovely. That was a really nice.
She understood the question.
It was just weird. It was kind of slightly out of body because I put no inflection in my reply. It was mad. It was lovely.
Yeah, well, because he asked if you believe in sex before marriage.
Oh, yes.
And would you practice it?
Oh, yes,
and you're
that's
just,
right,
yeah,
that's
you know,
right.
and he's getting more and more excited.
That's right. And so I was like this kind of automaton, Middle European sort of, almost doctor figure who would just provide what he wanted. Yeah,
Because
interesting.
you think he's rich and you're
Yes,
after his-
exactly.
Yeah. Did you get to keep anything from the set at all?
I got the
earrings.
dress.
Have you got the dress?
I have the dress.
Wow.
Oh, you're not wearing it today?
No, I could not get into the dress. that very reason. And there was a very wide skirt, so you couldn't get through doors easily.
Did they know that you took it, or did you just nick it at the
Good
end?
question. And I try and remember, and they may have made me pay for it. In those days, you were allowed to cut. If you liked your costume, you were allowed to sort of get a discount. So I may have got it as a discount, but I do remember the costume lady making it. And it was maroon and velvet with lots of flowers around the top and just yards and yards of net underneath.
As you said, it does emphasise your
Yes.
quite epic jugs in that episode,
God.
allowing you to even pop a polo down there. Did you have any input into it at all, or was it a sort of a surprise on the day of, here you go, this is what you'll be
This
exposing?
is your kit.
Yeah.
The costume lady had obviously thought there must be some jug reveal. It wasn't the kind of dress that you could then usefully take away and go to a debutante's dance in, just because the frock was big, the bottom bit was big, because it was so revealing. It was created like it was a bit odd. That dress was a bit odd. Let's face it.
Like the characters, exactly.
Yes. Exactly.
Well, we've talked a bit about the costumes, and Richie and Eddie obviously wear very similar costumes, but that's one episode where they're in different costumes. They're obviously trying to impress, and Richie's got his best on, and I've often wondered whether that's her only outfit. That's all she's left with, if her family are impoverished,
Yeah.
and she's turned up in the only thing
her work here.
she has left.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, it was very mad. And the big earrings, and then I think I had false eyelashes. I don't know. I think I just let them do it. I think that was very much who I was at the time as well. I think I'm probably still like that. Like even in Ab Fab, you just go, oh, just put me in the whatever jacket. Just here I am. Just put me in it.
Yeah.
Just because I just thought it was so much about costume that if I started worrying about how I would look, then it would take, for me, that wasn't helpful. And then some of the hairstyles and the jackets, you just go, no, that's fine. Just mad, do it.
Yeah.
That's fine.
People are still asking you questions about Bottom 30 years later. Did you ever have any idea just how popular it would be when you were doing it?
No, again, at this time, I can't remember where I was at. There was a very condensed time in my career where there were a lot of jobs. I was working, probably doing something all the time. I do remember that time. And it's interesting to think about other actors. And is that normal for actors? Or there are only some people at the, like I imagine Jennifer and Dawn are working all the time. But I think they're quite rare, those people. I think, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's just me. That's why, I write, or I want to write anyway, but I work hard, but I don't do this. There isn't a period of time where you're just constantly in work. And then you just, like, if you watch, I don't know, TV programs now, you go, I recognise that actress, but they may not have been in anything for years. And that is normal in the acting world. Can't remember what the question was. What was the question?
Did you have any idea of how popular Bottom would be? Did you get much of a reaction to it after the episode, for example? Did you get much fan response?
Oh, yes, I did. I think I did. Again, from the younger men who were students.
On behalf of someone who was a younger man at the time, I can only apologise.
What was the turnaround time from when you recorded and for when it came on TV?
I think it was something like 8 months or something, or quite soon, 6 months, 8 months. I think, I could be wrong. Yeah, it was something like that. But I think that the Bottom thing recognition then went through another cycle of being shown on repeats. So again, if the BBC decides to show things, that's quite powerful. And then TV Gold, who watches all these programs were on repeats. So you go, oh, has that been out? Or has Fab been out again? And then. So I'd be out and about and someone would recognise me and think, it must be because it's been on. But I'm not, honestly, genuinely, I just got on, did it. It's very nice if people loved something or loved that comedy. I understand why they loved it, because Rick is so funny. I understand why it was so special and a relief to have those comedy programmes. I get it.
What do you think is the secret to Rick and Aid's longevity and success and things? Can you put it into words?
Well, possibly because they met, I think I'm right in saying, at Manchester. So they met at that very sort of seismic time of being, a student, right? So they knew each other. They go back. So they could probably tolerate each other's foibles. That's really helpful, isn't it? If you have a history with someone. And they must have just, I've heard this, make each other laugh. I mean, I think that's how Jennifer and Dawn have carried on and endured. If you go, I really want to be with that person because I've got to tell them X and I want to know what their reaction is, what joy is that? So I think they just had that.
Yeah, the double act to be able to bounce off each other, it's something that does come up time and time again in comedy, isn't it?
Absolutely. You've got to be interested in the other person. Yeah, you've got to be interested in the other person, and I think they must have been.
And I've been. People have said to me, you like Bottom. That's a very masculine show. And do you think that Rick and Aid, got a bad rep for being sexist at the time or anything? I mean, obviously it was all ironic, but people who didn't get that. Would you say that Bottom is a sexist show, or would you say that actually they were involving a lot of women?
Well, I mean, as we've discussed about the lines, like with the nurse, I mean, the nurse got a lot of power in that exchange. So I think I don't think it occurred to them. I don't think, because they're modern thinkers who. All the alternative comedians, for instance, came after the ones before who would possibly be of a different political persuasion and go off and play golf. These people were of a different belief system, and that would spill over in their attitudes and their behaviour and their characters. So I don't think as people they were kind of sexist people at all. And as we said earlier, you've got to jump in and go for the kind of comedy that turns you on, and they did. Yeah, it is powerful and physical. Is that sexist? No, not really.
I think they were reaching for the funniest language they could find.
Yeah.
And, big jugs like that. That is funnier than
because it's forbidden
than
words.
Any other words.
Yes.
Really, like it's not aggressive particularly. It's actually quite immature, isn't it?
Yeah. It is exactly right. It's the words that all adolescent boys would probably say when they're reading their whatever, when their mothers aren't looking. It's easily recognised trigger words.
What do you think about their comedy makes them unique? Do you think it's the cartoon violence or the nihilism that pervades that pervades Bottom?
I think it is the nihilism. I think that is comedy. It's going to the dark, going to the nothing, going to the bit that we don't say. Like comedy is supposed to say the unsayable, isn't it? It's the only thing we have that will make us not feel alone. given this some thought, as you can tell.
Yeah.
I think it's freeing us up to just laugh at not just slapstick. I think it's just quite layered, really. As I say, it's not one-dimensional. I remember you're way too young to remember this. When I was growing up, there was somebody called Harry Worth. Now, my dad used to love Harry Worth, and he was kind of like slapstick. And in those days, you know, he did he'd trundle along and fall over and stuff. So this was very different, falling over, you know, and very energised and crazy. But I think they just made us be able to laugh at the bit in ourselves that we didn't know was there, but then they opened it up for us to know that it was there. That's their power.
It's been said in interviews that they sort of semi-based Bottom on Steptoe and Son. Richie and Eddie, like Steptoe and Son, are kind of at the bottom of life's heap. Do you think, how important a part do you think class plays in British comedy?
Well, it's a factor, depending on what genre of comedy. I mean, you know, interesting how Michael McIntyre did so well with his content, and he was middle class. You get traditionally, you don't get many middle class women comics, but then latterly you got me. I couldn't change how I spoke. Miranda, very upper middle class. But largely as a comedian, you want to represent the populace and open up the waves for the audience to not feel alone. So, you know, it would be odd to have like the Queen doing a routine because you know that they probably hadn't had the similar life to you and wouldn't be able to feed back your experience. So class does play a part, but it just plays a part. As basically you could extend that to go, as long as you are real and human, then that should land as well.
Can I just say, I would love to see on Christmas Day the Queen do a solid 15 minutes instead of the Queen's speech.
Yes, stand up.
As much as weird it would be, it would be funny. I think.
Well, that's what we've put our finger on, what is funny, because it's the incongruity. It's the incongruity, the juxtaposition of opposing elements, basically. So that is maybe, I mean, I don't know how incongruous they are, because the two of them, it's almost like with like, but it's them against the world. So they're kind of, it's a mix, isn't it? It's a mix. It's fascinating.
Yeah. You mentioned the comparison or the link between Rick and Aid's work and Waiting and Samuel Beckett.
Yeah.
We recently did an episode talking about Waiting for Godot in relation to Bottom, which they did on stage at university, and then in 1991 they also did it on stage at the Queen's Theatre.
Yes, they did. Yeah,
we wondered if you had if you saw the show, if you saw them doing it at the time.
I didn't see the show, but I knew that they were doing it, and it isn't a surprise that you get, you know, because it is absurd and nobody quite knows, you know, are they waiting? Who are they waiting for? But it is just that time passing, just the minutiae. That's the humour, that you make nothing funny.
Did they talk about that play and Beckett often?
Really?
Did they?
Did they? Not to me. But I think that Waiting for Godot has been done by a lot of male kind of pairing. Obviously there has to, it's like incarceration in nothing, and like the two of them are incarcerated in that grungy house, you know, trying to survive and navigate the world. It is about being stuck, them against the world. So I think that maybe there's a Beckett influence there.
Would you ever like to do Waiting for Godot? Because we were discussing
we mentioned some women casting, and we would
I'd jump in.
cast it, and,
I'm ready for a play. I think that would be nice.
There you go, you heard it here first.
We were mooting, because I don't know why Waiting for Godot is always an all male cast, but it
has.
Be.
I think I read that it has been done with a female cast, but I don't know. I mean, it's been a long while since it's been on it. Certainly in the West End.
It's quite a demanding play though, because I also, when I was doing my one weirdo year at drama school, we did Beckett, and I remember there was another scene where it was called Act Without Words 1 and 2, and I had to be in a sack on the ground, and I had to come out of the sack and eat a carrot, and that was what I did. So that would have appealed to Rick and Aid, I think. You know, just like finding meaning in questionable acts that are supposed to be meaningful. Yeah.
Do you remember what the audience response to it was? Did you get a round of applause when you ate the carrot?
No, because it was students, as far as I remember. I was short and not fat, but like middle, and the other person who got out of her sack was very tall. So it was a kind of, again, incongruity. It had to be two different physical types coming out of their sack. But if only I knew what it meant. But that's Sam Beckett. We ought to research. We ought to find that. Google that.
And meanwhile, there was an audience of people watching, all going, "I get this."
Yes, I'm sure they did. Yeah, exactly. Symbolism.
Yeah.
Happy Days was another one with a woman in it. Billy Whitelaw she appeared out of a mound, a sort of mad mound, and she was on the top of it saying things. I mean, but it's lovely. I mean, crazy juxtaposition is adorable, isn't it? I just love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's now 7 years, nearly 8 years since Rick very sadly passed away. As his friend, it must be quite comforting to you that the entire nation still remembers him so fondly and probably will forever. Is that a comfort to you as a friend?
It is, because it also means that there was a truth, that people understand that truth, and you don't get it very often in people. And he got to do it. He got to do his original work enough for people to reference it, like you are. You can have a lot of talented people who never get seen, who never get understood, who never get the chance. But he was charismatic, original, generous, all those things. And, then he did have a chance in those 80s and 90s to go off. He did do straight stuff or films in America afterwards. He got his go. He did get a go at sampling a lot of the so-called riches that were on offer from someone who came up through stand-up comedy. And that's how we all came up. So he got his chances to sample the life of a bit of a star, as well, across the pond.
Did Rick ultimately always prefer comedy, though? Was that?
Oh, I went to see him in
main
an
passion?
Inspector,
The Real Inspector Hound.
Yeah, was it that? Yeah, at the National.
Oh, I don't know, but I directed that play once. I'd love to have seen Rick Mell do that. That would have been fantastic.
Was it like by a French author or something?
Oh
like?
no, Tom Stoppard did Real Inspector Hound.
Oh, okay, yes. I don't know if it was that, but it was like in a proper role quite early on. He was at the National, playing alongside so-called conventional actors, and he could do that. He could hold his own. It was him.
I think, was it called The Government Inspector?
Yes, The Government Inspector. And again, here is a man who uniquely could do it all. Very rare, very special. And I'm just delighted that people get it and appreciate it.
He absolutely could have done the straight acting thing, for full time, but we're also glad that he chose to do comedy. I think he was quoted once as saying, "If I can make people forget the grimness of life, I'm happy," kind of thing. That was what he wanted to do.
Oh yeah, and so rare. It's great that there are more comedians out there and the platforms change. I get all that, but you still, as an individual, I still need to like and connect with what I see. And we all have different tastes, but I think he appealed to most.
And it was reported recently that you agreed with Jennifer Saunders when she said that Ab Fab couldn't be made in what's now coined the woke era. What is it about it, do you think, that means that Ab Fab couldn't be made? Do you agree with that, or do you think it would just need a few tweaks here and there?
I don't know. Well, because I'm not tasked with writing it, I wouldn't dare. I'm very grateful for my non-principal role in Ab Fab. Unless you make a thing of, like with writing, you now have a thing of sensitivity readers. Unless you somehow grab the culture as it is and find a way to reflect that without disrespecting it, but flagging it up, which is what they did in the height of Ab Fab. They flagged up the ridiculousness of all this money and the fakeness of PR world. You could maybe lampoon what's going on now, but is the world ready for that, or are we still too earnest about flagging up the inequalities and injustices? I don't know the answer.
Because in your Fringe show, I might as well say it, you talked about a lot of topics, but also battling sexism and being bumped, I think, from a panel show for Maureen Lipman.
Yes.
On a panel show about women being on panel shows.
Yes.
Do you think there's still a long way to go before women will be given that level playing field?
I do. And I don't know what it means. It was interesting. There was a very powerful woman called Jude Kelly, who was an early producer of Mamma Mia, and she's like really powerful woman, sets up all sorts of organisations. I'm in awe of anyone who can do that, because I struggle so much with that myself. And she was quoted recently of saying, you know, women are just not there yet. We've got the attention on this, we've got an attention on that, new attention, great. But what about women? So it's quite interesting hearing a powerful woman saying that now, literally about a month ago.
Yeah.
So, but it's a complex one, because nobody likes to piss people off or grumble. You know, like we had the grumpy old women, of who I like very much as individuals, but you go, do we want to be grumpy now? Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Do we want to be seeing as? But then it came from grumpy old men, so it was an equalizer. So you could, so that is right. Yeah.
And did you personally face a lot of sexism in your career?
I think looking back, people, as I said earlier, aren't necessarily comfortable with women who are a bit, they just do their own thing, and I don't mean to, but that's me. And so there's quite a big cost for not being conventional, but I'm not unconventional on purpose. But yeah, people would assume that they would have sex. But people would have sex if they wanted to, and even if they didn't in those days. So I haven't got my head around it, but I'm not going to lie and say, I didn't have the casting couch. I mean, good luck to those women who were faced with it and walked out with their head held high. I'm not one of those.
Well, we won't press you further
I don't really
on,
care.
on
I don't care enough,
whose
to be
casting
honest.
couch you were on, Helen. But
Quite a
that is
few.
obviously why there is a change in a shift, and that can only be a good thing for moving forward with the times. Surely.
But I think everybody has to move forward. So it just takes. I mean, those disc jockeys who were done for things. I mean, they say that, you know, in those days, the culture, men would just grope women. Or what is grope? Is grope?
Yeah.
I'm not defending or promoting it, but I'm not promoting groping, but
consensual groping is
yes,
fine.
it just takes some thought. Remembering how I grew up when I was young and female, and largely that is the time when you people kind of want to shag you, basically.
When you
be
found
honest.
yourself in a casting couch situation, were I'm assuming it was producers, because they're usually the ones who are often the roles, powerful producers. Do they make it overt, or do they try and make it subtle but with a sort of nod and a wink, or do they just sort of do they make it very plain? I want sex.
I think it's much more indirect than that. You just go, I always used to get myself in a situation, and it's much easier to do it, and it's quicker.
Yeah.
And then you, and if somebody is powerful and talking about an interesting program that you're quite interested in, and the whole thing isn't unpalatable, then I suppose occasionally those things would happen. So I don't think I was a victim, as people talk of. So maybe one has to kind of be layered about this. I think my personality was just a bit, in those days, like I was brought up that it was rude to say no.
Yeah.
And if somebody asked you to dance, it was rude, and you had to do a dance. My father said, you have to just do one dance with the person because it's rude otherwise.
Right.
So I'm not clear about it. I don't have the answers, but I'm not going to lie about what went on. See, I haven't learned how to talk about this, so I'm experimenting in my dialogue on this. So I might then revisit this and go, oh, actually, I didn't mean that. But one has to be quite large when one comes back at these very relevant questions. So I need to look at my own head and my expression of those times.
We'll give you a transcript of all this before it goes out. Don't worry.
Otherwise, I'll get I'm not
sued.
promoting, but I'm not denying. And also I need to keep my autonomy, and I don't rate the importance of certain things over others. So I feel that's still quite empowered in some form, but I'm up for discussing it.
So you are a performer, creative of many talents, lots of strings to your bow, actor, comedian, author, presenter. If you could just have one thing that you'd say to define yourself, what would you pick?
I would like to do more comedy, stand-up, comedy acting, comedy writing. I think that's where I'm ready now, because I've shed a lot of the nervousness and the fear, as we were saying, of not being liked and not being accepted, because I haven't been liked and I haven't been accepted. So the worst has happened. So while I've got a few years left, and I don't know how much longer, I might as well just drop into the bit that I began with, which was age 10, doing the sketches and people laughing.
As you've obviously, you've been writing books in recent years, would that go on the back burner?
Well, this memoir, I want the memoir to try and say a lot of what we've said today. I want to try and tell the story. And once I've got the memoir done, I'll be free to write kind of wacky, like I'd like to write another comedy novel, the freedom of, like we're talking about Rick and Aid. They just went into their heads. They didn't censor. So I think the memoir and talking about oneself is quite hard, because you're trying to be truthful and because you represent a lot of things to a lot of people. It's not a free world at the moment. So I'm working out how to express things are quite important. It's very difficult.
Could you tell our listeners a little bit about the Comedy Women in Print Prize that you
Set up?
Yeah.
So I wrote my comedy novel, and then amazingly, the only thing I've ever been nominated for was the P.G. Wodehouse Comedy Literary Prize, whatever its official title, and that was so exciting. Didn't win, obviously, and I'd been a judge on other, like the Women's Prize and stuff, so I thought, there isn't a prize for female witty writing. And then it was just one of those bad days where you have an idea and then you do it. And I've had about 3 in my life. One was when I wanted to have a garden fete about age 10, and my dad said okay, and we did it, and it was a success. Second one was when I decided to write a play in Edinburgh, and I got Miranda Hart to be in it. That was bad. Not Miranda, the play. That was a mistake. And then this Comedy Women in Print I've been doing for 5 years, and it has kind of brought me to my knees, because I have to be an administrator and write emails and spell and have about 20 things. It's a bit like being a social worker, where you have to manage a lot of things at once. The beauty of just being free to do comedy is it's just so pure. You're just doing that. And then everything else, just all the cluttering in your brain, that goes away. So I'm really struggling with it. But people's careers have been made, and it does affect people, and we have produced people who become published who wouldn't become published. I think it's an important thing to do and to have created, but it's a killer.
It's a really great initiative. I think it's fantastic. And you're in your 5th year. Can you tell us a bit about the shortlisters? And
The shortlisters are Dolly Alderton, Mel. I can never say her lovely surname.
Gedroic.
Thank you, Gedroic. And some very Lynn Truss. The range of the wit on the page of 6 titles, which is on the Comedy Women in Print website. That's what's important, that it isn't just one type of comedy, because my whole beef about in the 80s you could only have 2 or 3 women at a time being championed, which was French and Saunders and Ruby Wax. And that's how we should change. You go, there's this kind of comedy, there's kind of thriller, there's kind of like British kind of comedy, there's the dark kind of comedy, surreal, domestic comedy, mundane kind of comedy. Let's get the range to reflect the parity of where we wouldn't even think with the male titles.
Yeah, female comedy shouldn't be a thing in the sense that there shouldn't be a differentiation.
Exactly, and it used to have to be about romance. You could get away with a romantic comedy prize, but you had to have romance attached. So we are it is quite exciting time where one of the judges said, it was so good, it wasn't about somebody having a baby and there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be able to create a breadth of genre, really.
And you're an experienced author and writer. We are currently in the process of writing a book about Bottom. Do you have any tips on writing a book?
Ooh, I'll get lots of nice photos,
yeah,
which
we've
sure
paid
you
extras to get the photo rights and stuff.
Yeah, get some nice photos, because with something like this, people will be drawn to that, and that will tell the story. I think you want some really good, bad, knuckle crunching anecdotes. It needs to be full of anecdotes, because people take that's a takeaway. And some chronology and some background of their families. What makes a person, where do they come in the family, a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But just celebrate what the 80s and 90s were about, and why we fell in, why we needed it, really, why it pinged for us.
When can we expect your memoir to be out?
Next
Helen?
year.
Okay. Excellent.
Please, God.
We shall look forward to
What
that.
year is that for any listeners listening to this in a year that's not now?
You're complex. Next year, 2022. I'm praying for that, and I'm asking our listeners. I'm calling myself part of your group now
You
to
are.
pray alongside that it gets published next year.
Well, we hope that it gets published alongside ours as well.
Yes,
It'd be
we
great
could
to
do
see.
double whammy.
Yeah. If you could sum up Bottom in a couple of lines, how would you sum it up?
Two men against the world, being very dirty, hopeless, and hilarious.
And just to ask, what British comedy are you enjoying watching on telly at the moment, or is it all about obviously reading the comedy novels for you at the moment?
If you said a comedy, I'd probably appreciate it. I hate chat shows. I can't watch live television. It's too worrying.
Oh, really? You haven't watched much telly lately then?
I can't because I'm not in them, and I get a bit jealous. But I did like the Peep Show. I'm up for anything. I'm sure that the one that played the son of Rick, that comedian's got a new one out.
Greg
called
Davies.
The Cleaner.
Yeah.
Haven't watched that, but I'm sure I'd probably enjoy that.
Yeah, good fun.
I
that,
like
yeah.
stuff that isn't pushed too much. Having said how much Rick and Aid push it, I like to find
Did you watch Man
it.
Down? Did you watch Man Down? That was the
No,
show Rick
I haven't
was
watched
in.
it for the very reason I couldn't. It was too painful. But I know it would probably be very funny. So I'm full of respect for it. I can live without watching it.
Yeah, I understand.
Aside from Rick and Aid's work, are you a fan of slapstick in general? Like any other slapstick or old silent comedians who do slapstick or anything like that?
I think I'm an admirer of the performing element now more than before. You kind of see the skill. But I like words.
Yeah.
I just like satire and words and the joy of words. That's just, like when we said, that's a lovely blouse you've got on. I mean, we all understood that. So I just say, bring me those words, and I just love it. So I like word stuff.
Smashing blouse, just to...
Oh, it's smashing. Yes, you're
Yeah,
right.
I know a lot of our listeners will be saying it.
I was biting my
quite
tongue
right,
there as well.
yeah.
Like,
Quite right. Smashing blouse. Yes, absolutely.
We should have opened with what a smashing blouse you have on.
Same old.
Which you absolutely do. But I'm delighted to hear you've still got the dress from the episode.
Yeah.
That
You
is-
could, for your book, you could, I'll have to hold it on a hanger because I won't be able to get into it. But there's a promise for a photo.
That would be
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
can you tell us what Lady Natasha would be up to now? Where did she end up after we see her in the episode? What became of her?
Well, she might be a temp somewhere in some kind of recruitment office by London Bridge. I don't know. She'd have survived.
I think after Richie should have moved on and got her claws into an older rich guy
Yeah.
who was near death and managed
She's
to
Yes.
actually rich.
shagged him to death and then
Perfect.
got the cash.
I
Yeah.
think there's nothing wrong with that. Whatever works.
Do you think her and Lily Lineker were in cahoots with each other?
Oh, remind me.
We interviewed Lisa Maxwell. So Lily Lineker's the owner of the
Oh,
Love
yes.
Bureau. and
Maybe money had exchanged hands.
Lisa thought that she was in it to get men herself potentially, and she was a bit of a
Well,
of a
bigging up
spinster.
her part. I love Lisa for that. And she was, maybe she was.
Maybe she was giving you out to all these rich gentlemen.
I think
they-
there's a spin-off show.
They'd
there.
take the proceeds between the two of them.
Yeah.
and
Any
it worked
spin-off
out.
show, as long as it has its own identity and there's dignity to it, I'm there. Yeah.
Well, we'd definitely watch that. Helen, thank you very much for joining us here today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's
Thank
been
you.
fun. Thank
Before
you
we
for asking me.
just to ask if you got anything else you want to plug at the moment, or
The Comedy Women imprint, the memoir. Oh, and also I am going to be doing a bit of performing at Pride Cabaret, where Bill Bailey did it, where I introduce a lot of circus acts, and I will be singing
when will that be?
January to March.
Fantastic. 2022,
Singing.
Brilliant.
Did you hear that? Singing.
Singing. Oh, what kind of stuff were you
I
singing?
cannot sing.
Oh.
So I've got a little bit of time to learn how to sing.
Fantastic.
Oh man, okay.
People
Well, we look forward
spend
to that.
years learning. I'm sure. Yeah, a few months. Be fine. What's the memoir called? Does it have a title?
Supply teacher of comedy.
Nice.
That's a good title.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Helen. It's been an absolute pleasure
Thank
having you here.
you.
Thank you.